used to think betrayal would come crashing through the door loud, dramatic, impossible to ignore. But in truth, mine arrived quietly, like a draft under a locked window. My name is Victoria. I'm 38 years old. And I used to believe that love, real love, could survive anything. Until I found out that the man I built my life around had built an entirely different one behind my back. It wasn't a single moment that shattered me. It was the slow accumulation of small things that, at first, didn't seem worth noticing. A forgotten phone call. A new password on his laptop. The way his eyes stopped meeting mine when he said I love you. After 12 years of marriage, you learn the difference between routine and distance. And what we had become was a map of polite silences and unspoken resentment. My husband, Daniel, was a financial advisor successful. Admired. The kind of man who smiled with perfect timing at parties. To everyone else. He was charming and articulate. To me, he was a man who came home smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. It wasn't a scent I wore. It was too sweet. Too floral. Like something chosen to make an entrance. The first time I noticed, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a client hugged him goodbye. Maybe it was the secretary at his office. That's how women like me learn to gaslight ourselves softly. Politely. With good manners. Because we've been taught that to accuse is to risk losing the illusion of peace. For months, I said nothing. I smiled through dinner parties and charity events, performing the role of the supportive wife, while my chest ached with unanswered questions. I told myself that love was compromise, that loyalty meant endurance. He mistook denial for strength. Then, one Thursday afternoon, the universe decided to stop protecting my delusion. He had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter, something he never did. The screen glowed softly in the sunlight. An email still half-written. I wasn't looking for proof. But proof doesn't need an invitation. It simply waits for you to look up. The subject line read, "Last night felt like a dream." My hands went cold. I read the first few lines and stopped breathing. I can still feel your perfume on my skin. I wanted to call you this morning, but she was in the kitchen. I hate hiding. I wish I could tell everyone you're the reason I smile now. That was the moment my world split into before and after. There are wounds that bleed out, and there are wounds that just echo silently. Endlessly. I stood there staring at the screen until the words blurred. The cursor blinked at the end of the sentence, almost mocking me. I didn't cry. Not yet. My body had gone into that strange calm that comes before a storm, a silence that means survival. Her name was Melissa. I found it later in the thread. Neatly signed at the end of every email, like an artist finishing her work. She was younger, 27. Pretty in a calculated way. I recognized her name from somewhere. Then I remembered she was the new event coordinator at the company he often partnered with. I'd met her once. Months ago. At a charity gala. She'd complimented my dress. I'd thanked her. And my husband had stood beside me. Smiling. I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I did what women like me are taught to do. I planned. Revenge doesn't always come from rage. Sometimes it comes from clarity. I copied every email, every photo, every message thread. I saved them to a folder named Insurance. Then I waited. Because I didn't want to explode his life in a fit of fury. I wanted the truth to destroy itself in public daylight, where denial couldn't hide it. The next 2 weeks were unbearable. He kissed me goodbye each morning. And every time his lips touched my cheek, I imagined the ghost of her perfume between us. He laughed at the dinner table, telling stories about clients and colleagues, while I sat there studying the curve of his mouth, wondering if he had smiled the same way with her. At night, he turned away from me in bed. His phone would light up on the nightstand, vibrating softly, and I'd watch him pretend to sleep through it. I memorized the rhythm of his lies. It's strange how deceit has a sound like breathing that doesn't match the heartbeat. I began noticing other cracks, Credit card charges from restaurants we'd never visited together. Hotel receipts from business trips. A new cologne. Bolder and more expensive. Sitting on the bathroom counter. I could almost taste the irony, him trying to cover 1 cent with another. One evening, after he fell asleep, I went into his phone. The passcode hadn't changed. He was arrogant that way. There, in his messages, I found their latest exchange. She was asking if he'd told me yet. He replied, "Not yet. She's fragile. After the anniversary party. I'll handle it." Fragile. That word stayed in my head like a splinter. He had no idea who I truly was. Fragile wasn't the right word. Patient was. The anniversary party was my idea, 12 years of marriage. A beautiful house. The image of perfection. It was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became my stage. I sent out the invitations myself. Friends. Family. Colleagues, even the company he worked with. I made sure Melissa's team was assigned to coordinate the event. I wanted her there. I wanted them both to see the face of the woman they had underestimated. The night of the party, I wore red. Not the soft kind, but the deep, almost dangerous shade that looks like power disguised as elegance. My mother used to say, "Red is the color of women who refuse to die quietly." Guests filled the garden. Laughter floating in the air like smoke. Daniel played the perfect host. Shaking hands. Making toasts. When he kissed my cheek for the cameras, I smiled for the flash, the image of devotion frozen forever in pixels. Melissa arrived late. Of course. She wore black, young, sleek, deliberate. Her smile faltered when she saw me. But she recovered quickly. She was good at pretending, too. Throughout the evening, I watched them from across the room. Their eyes met once, twice. Small sparks quickly extinguished. She whispered something to a colleague and excused herself toward the back patio. 5 minutes later, Danielle followed. I waited 1 more minute. Then I followed them both. They were standing under the oak tree near the fountain. The same spot where he had proposed to me 12 years earlier. The universe does love symmetry. His hand was on her arm. Their faces close. Their voices low. "Are you sure?" she asked. "You said you'd tell her." "I will," he said. "Just not tonight. She's fragile." That word again. I stepped into the light, my heels loud against the stone path. "Oh, don't stop on my account," I said. They froze. The color drained from her face. His mouth fell open, forming a word that never arrived. The silence that followed was perfect heavy. Electric. Honest. For once. He couldn't lie fast enough. "Victoria. This isn't. Don't," I said. "Don't you dare insult me with another lie." My voice didn't tremble. It was calm. Precise. Surgical. Melissa tried to speak, but I raised a hand. "You should go," I told her. "This isn't your scene. Yet." She hesitated, then walked away, her heels clicking like punctuation marks on her exit. He turned to me, shoulders sagging. "I can explain." "No," I said. "You can't. There are moments in life when rage burns so clean it feels holy." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply looked at him, the man I'd loved, the man I'd buried my youth in, and felt nothing. The opposite of love isn't hate. It's clarity. He stood there beneath that oak tree, the same one where he had once promised me forever. And for a brief, surreal moment, I almost felt pity, not for what he had done, but for the sheer smallness of him now stripped of the charm, stripped of the performance, reduced to a man clutching excuses that no longer worked. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "It wasn't supposed to," he started, but I lifted my hand, a gesture so quiet it stopped him cold. "Don't," I said. "Not tonight. You've already said enough lies for both of us. Behind us, the laughter from the party carried across the garden, faint and tinny, like the echo of another life. The lights strung through the trees flickered softly in the wind, and for the first time I noticed how sharp the night air was. Every scent seemed exaggerated, the smell of champagne, the hum of music, the tremor in his voice when he finally whispered, "I never meant to hurt you." That was the line that broke something inside me. Never meant to hurt you. As if betrayal were an accident. As if infidelity were a spill he could mop up with regret. I looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "You meant to do everything you did," I said. "You just never expected me to find out." He took a step toward me, but I moved back. I didn't want the scent of him on me anymore. The music shifted inside the playlist I had chosen myself, the one that now felt like a joke. I could hear guests calling for him, asking where the host had gone. It occurred to me that the show needed its lead actor. "You should go back," I said. "They're waiting for you." "Victoria, please." "No," I said, my voice steady. "You've had enough of my time. The rest of the night belongs to me." He didn't understand what I meant. Not yet. He would. I walked away, my heels clicking on the stone path, my heartbeat matching their rhythm. I went straight to the house, to the small office we shared. On his desk was the laptop I had borrowed earlier that week, his personal one, not the work-issued machine. I had set everything up days ago, ready for this moment. All I needed was the right cue. It took 3 keystrokes. The projector that looped photos of our life together, our travels, our anniversaries. The smiling couple. Everyone believed we were flickered and shifted. The slide changed. Music faded. And on the screen, the words appeared. "Behind every perfect marriage lies the truth." Gasps rippled through the crowd. He turned toward the sound, confusion crossing his face. Then the slideshow began. Emails, screenshots, photos. Every message he and Melissa had ever exchanged. Every confession. Every lie. Each slide landed like a heartbeat, methodical. Undeniable. Guests froze. The air grew thick with disbelief. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." He stood there, paralyzed. I watched from the doorway, invisible in plain sight. I thought I might feel vindicated, triumphant, even. But what I felt was quieter. Relief. Maybe. Or the absence of pretending. When the final message faded from the screen, the crowd erupted into murmurs. A woman at one of the front tables covered her mouth. One of his partners, a man named Alan, stood slowly and said, "Daniel, what is this?" My husband didn't answer. He just stared at the screen as if the words could somehow rewrite themselves. The silence stretched until it snapped. I stepped forward then, out of the shadows, my voice clear enough to cut through the noise. "It's the truth," I said. "You all deserve to see it." Heads turned. The murmuring stopped. He looked at me, truly looked for the first time in months. And I saw it fear, not of losing me, but of being seen for what he really was. "Victoria," he said, his voice cracking. "Stop this. Please." "I already did," I said, "years ago, when you decided my love wasn't enough." No one moved. For a moment, it was just the 2 of us in that crowded room. 2 actors at the end of a play neither wanted to admit was over. I didn't wait for applause. I turned and walked out through the patio doors, the sound of whispers chasing me like wind. Outside, the night felt different, lighter somehow. I walked until the music and the noise blurred into nothing. The sea wasn't far. I could hear the soft rush of it beyond the hedges. I took off my shoes and let my bare feet sink into the cold grass. The first tears came then, slow and deliberate, like my body was finally catching up to what my mind already knew. I don't know how long I stood there before someone spoke behind me. "That was brutal. I turned. It was Ethan. Melissa's husband. I'd met him once at a networking dinner. A quiet man with thoughtful eyes. Tonight, his suit jacket was wrinkled, his tie askew. There was no surprise in his face, just a tired kind of understanding. "She told you?" I asked. He nodded. "Yesterday. I didn't believe her until tonight." We stood there in silence for a while. Two strangers bound by the same wreckage. The irony wasn't lost on me. "I'm sorry you had to see that," I said finally. "Don't be," he replied. "Truth hurts. But lies rot." His words landed deep. For a brief second, I almost smiled. The wind picked up, carrying the last notes of the party down toward the cliffs. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering. Not from cold, but from release. "Are you okay?" he asked. "No," I said honestly. "But I will be." He nodded, as if that was the only answer worth giving. Then, with a kind of quiet gentleness, he offered me his handkerchief. It was such a small act of decency that I nearly broke. After months of deceit and silence, kindness felt unfamiliar. "Thank you," I said, taking it. We walked together toward the parking lot, not saying much. Sometimes silence between two wounded people can feel like grace. At my car, he paused. "They'll both try to explain," he said. "They always do." "I won't listen," I said. "I've already heard enough." He looked at me with something like respect. "Then you're ahead of me," he said. And with that, he walked away into the night. I drove home with the windows down, letting the air sting my face. The city lights blurred into gold streaks on the windshield. For the first time in years, I felt awake. The house was dark when I entered our house. I walked through each room slowly, touching the furniture, the photos, the remnants of a life that now felt borrowed. On the mantel was a framed picture of us from our 10th anniversary, smiling on a beach in Thailand. His arm around my waist. I took it down. The glass cracked when it hit the bottom of the trash can. That sounds small. Final was the sound of the end. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window until dawn, watching light creep across the floorboards. At some point, I realized my hands had stopped shaking. I was done waiting for explanations, for apologies, for closure delivered by someone else's conscience. By sunrise, I had made a decision. He had taken my peace, my trust, my years. I would take back something of his, not out of vengeance, but balance. People like Daniel don't understand loss until it costs them comfort. When he came home later that morning, rumpled and desperate, he found his key didn't fit the lock. On the door was an envelope taped neatly in the center. Inside were divorce papers and a note in my handwriting. "You always said love was about risk. Consider this mine." That was the last time I saw him in our house. He called every hour for the first few days, leaving voicemails that swung wildly between apology and outrage. One minute it was, "I made a mistake. Please, we can fix this." And the next it was, "You've humiliated me. Victoria, do you have any idea what you've done?" I stopped listening after the third one. I deleted the rest without opening them. There's a strange peace in silence, the kind that follows a storm that has already torn the roof off. I didn't need to hear him scramble for reasons anymore. There was nothing left to save. When he realized I wasn't going to respond, his tone changed. The messages became short, transactional. He wanted his clothes, his watch, his golf clubs. I left them all in neat boxes outside the front gate. I didn't want a single trace of him in the house. It's strange how empty a space feels when the lies are gone. You think the silence will hurt? But it doesn't. It heals. Slowly, I started rediscovering the sound of my own voice, the rhythm of mornings without his shadow pacing the hallway. My lawyer, my friend Clara, helped me file the paperwork. She had seen it all before men like him. Confident until the ink on the divorce papers dries. then suddenly terrified of their own consequences. He'll try to make you feel guilty. She warned. Don't let him. I promised I wouldn't. He tried anyway. He sent flowers to the office, left notes under my door, even waited outside once. When I stepped out to tell him to leave, he looked smaller, somehow like a man deflated from the inside. His tie was loose, his eyes red-rimmed. Can we talk? He asked. About what? About us. About how it got this far. I almost laughed. You mean how you lied? How you built a second life while I was busy keeping the first one alive? He flinched. I didn't mean for it to happen that way. Yes. You did. I said quietly. You just didn't think I'd ever stop forgiving you. He stepped closer, reaching for my hand. But I stepped back. Victoria, he said. I lost my head. I fell into something stupid. But we're not like other couples. We can fix this. We've been through too much to end like this. I looked at him then. Really looked. The same man who used to tell me what kind of wine to order. Who corrected my pronunciation of Italian words. Who once said that my simplicity was part of my charm, like I was some pet project he could decorate with compliments. Daniel, I said, we didn't end tonight. We ended the day you decided to love someone else and call it a mistake. What happened at the party was just the truth catching up. He didn't reply. His eyes darted to the street, as if searching for someone to rescue him from accountability. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. You were everything, he said. Then why wasn't I enough? He didn't have an answer. Men like him never do. That night, I blocked his number. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat by the window, and watched the lights flicker on in the city. I thought of all the years I had spent waiting for him to come home, waiting for him to notice me, waiting for him to love me without conditions. And I realized that waiting had been my biggest mistake. Weeks passed. The gossip eventually faded, though whispers have a long memory. Some friends reached out. Others disappeared. I learned quickly who was loyal to me and who had been loyal only to the illusion of our marriage. One evening, as I was leaving the grocery store, I saw Melissa. She was standing by her car, talking on the phone. She didn't see me at first. When she did, her face drained of color. I could tell she wanted to avoid me. But I didn't move. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way I had been. She ended the call and walked over, her heels clicking nervously on the pavement. Victoria, she said softly. I didn't think I'd ever see you again. Life's funny that way, I replied. She hesitated, then said, I wanted to say I'm sorry. I looked at her. Really looked. She was younger. Yes, but not unscarred. Her hands trembled slightly. Her eyes carried the same exhaustion I'd seen in mine months ago. Are you still with him? I asked. She shook her head. No. He started lying to me too. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. No, I said quietly. You shouldn't. She blinked, tears catching the light. He told me you didn't care anymore. That you were cold. That your marriage was over long before me. I let out a slow breath. He told me you were just a colleague. Guess we both believed what we wanted to. She nodded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us wasn't hostility anymore. It was something softer. Shared wreckage. Can I ask you something? She said. What? How did you stay so calm that night? You didn't scream. You didn't fall apart. I thought about that for a moment, because I'd already fallen apart. I said, what you saw was me standing up. Her eyes welled. I wish I were as strong as you. I shook my head. You don't want to be me. Melissa, strength like that costs too much. She looked away then, biting her lip, and I realized she was still living in the ruins of the same man who had burned us both. Before she left, she said, he's lost everything. You know, his clients, his reputation. People talk. I'm sure they do. I said, Karma has an excellent memory. That night, I didn't dream about him for the first time. I slept straight through until morning. Months turned into a year. I sold the house and moved to a smaller place near the coast, a white cottage with wide windows and the sound of the ocean as my alarm clock. I started painting again. Something I hadn't done since college. At first, my hands felt clumsy, but soon the colors began to make sense again. Bold strokes. Messy honesty. It was a language I'd forgotten how to speak. Ethan reached out one afternoon. He'd seen my name mentioned in a local paper. Some small feature about women rebuilding after divorce. He asked if I wanted to grab coffee. I almost said no, but something in me, some quiet, curious part said, yes. He arrived looking softer. 2. Like life had humbled him and made him gentler. We talked for hours. Not about them, but about everything else: work, family, how people survive, what they think will destroy them. He told me he'd started volunteering at a youth center. I told him I'd started painting again. When I mentioned the exhibition I was planning, he smiled. You're turning pain into art, he said. That's dangerous in the best way. I laughed for the first time in a long while. Not the polite kind, but real, unguarded laughter that came from somewhere deeper than my lungs. After that, we met again, and again, not because we were searching for replacements, but because two broken people sometimes recognize in each other the shape of healing. He never once asked about Daniel, and I never asked about Melissa. It was an unspoken agreement. The past stays buried, but its lessons remain. For the first time in years, I felt peace that didn't need an audience. The first time Ethan came to my new home, it was raining, that quiet, steady kind of rain that seems to wash the edges off the world. I had just finished a painting, a large abstract piece full of crimson streaks and pale gold. Something raw and alive. He stood before it for a long time, hands in his pockets, head tilted slightly. It's beautiful, he said. It feels like freedom and pain at the same time. That's about right, I answered, smiling faintly. He looked at me, then really looked the way no one had in a long time. There was no pity in his eyes. No hunger. No curiosity wrapped in judgment. Just presence. I didn't realize how much I'd missed being seen that way. Without expectation or comparison, we sat by the window with coffee, listening to the rain. It wasn't romantic yet, it was something purer. Two survivors of the same storm, sitting in its quiet aftermath. The sound of it filled the silences between our words. He told me that after his marriage collapsed, he had moved in with his older sister for a while. I couldn't stand my own apartment, he said. It still smelled like her perfume, the same kind she wore the night I found out. What was it called? I asked. He laughed softly. Something ridiculous. Midnight Promise. Can you imagine? I smiled. They always make heartbreak sound expensive. He chuckled, then turned serious. You know what I've learned? People cheat because they think they're chasing excitement, but all they're really chasing is escape from themselves. I nodded slowly, and when they run out of road, they blame the ones who stayed. He met my eyes and said, exactly. It's strange how validation from a stranger can heal wounds that years of love couldn't touch. There was no agenda in his words. No manipulation, just truth spoken plainly. For the first time, I realized how light honesty can feel. Over the next few months, he became part of my world. Not by force, but by presence. Sometimes we'd meet for coffee. Sometimes we'd walk along the cliffs in silence. He was patient with my pace, never pushing, never asking for more than I could give. One evening, we found ourselves back at the same cafe where we'd first met after everything fell apart. He was stirring his drink absently, his eyes distant. You ever wonder what you'd say if you saw them again? He asked quietly. I thought about that. I hadn't seen Daniel since the day I left. I'd heard bits of gossip, the lost clients, the failed deals, the quick collapse of his career, but I'd kept my distance. The idea of confronting him felt unnecessary. I don't think I'd say anything, I said finally. Some people don't deserve closure. Silence is punishment enough. He nodded, then smiled sadly. You always find the poetic version of things. Maybe that's the only way I can survive them. He laughed softly, and the tension eased. But later that night, when I got home, I found myself standing by the window, looking out at the sea. The moonlight touched the water in silver ribbons, and I realized that somewhere deep down, part of me still wanted an ending, not revenge, not even vindication, just an ending that belonged to me. That ending came sooner than I expected. It was a Tuesday morning when I received the letter. Not an email, a real letter. In an envelope addressed by hand. The handwriting was familiar in the way an old scar is familiar, faintly painful. It was from Daniel. For a long time, I didn't open it. I placed it on the kitchen table, made coffee, fed the cat, watered the plant's small rituals to delay the inevitable. Finally, I sat down and broke the seal. His words were careful, measured, almost clinical. He wrote that he had lost everything. The firm had let him go after a client filed a complaint. His relationship with Melissa had ended after she discovered he'd been messaging other women. He was living in a rented apartment, barely holding things together. Then, the part that made me pause. I know you probably hate me. And maybe you should, but I've been thinking about the way you looked at me that night. Calm. Unflinching. I used to think silence meant weakness. Now I understand it was strength. You were stronger than I ever was. And I see that now too late. I'm sorry. Victoria. Truly sorry. For a long time, I stared at the letter. It wasn't the apology I'd imagined all those sleepless nights. It wasn't dramatic or desperate. It was hollow. Almost small. A man finally aware of his own fragility. I folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer where I kept other artifacts of that old life, our marriage certificate. A few photographs. The keys that no longer fit any door I owned. Then I went outside. Barefoot. Into the sunlight. The garden was quiet, except for the sound of waves in the distance. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, realizing that forgiveness wasn't about him anymore. It was about freeing the part of me that had been trapped in his shadow. That weekend, Ethan came over again. I didn't tell him about the letter right away. Instead, we spent the afternoon repainting the old fence around the cottage. When the last plank was done, I finally told him. He listened silently, wiping paint from his hands. Are you going to reply? He asked. No, I said. He's not asking for forgiveness. He's asking for reassurance. I won't give him that. He nodded approvingly. That's strength. I looked at him, smiling faintly. No, that's peace. Later that evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ethan turned to me and said something I didn't expect. You know, I used to think revenge meant making them hurt, but now I think it just means living well enough that they have to live with knowing they didn't break you. I didn't reply right away. I just watched the horizon fade from gold to violet, the last light sinking into the sea. Then I said softly, maybe that's what karma really is, not punishment, but proof that truth always comes home. He smiled. Then you've already won. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of salt and rain. For the first time, I felt the future opening. Not as something to survive, but something to choose. When he left that night, he turned at the gate and said, Don't disappear again. You won't? I said, not from myself. That night, I slept with the windows open, listening to the sea. I dreamed of red paint and rain and laughter that didn't echo off empty walls. In the morning, when sunlight reached across the bed, I realized I hadn't thought of Daniel at all. I made coffee, poured 2 cups, and sat by the window waiting for Ethan. And when he arrived, carrying fresh bread and that familiar, quiet smile, I finally understood closure isn't a letter or an apology. It's the moment you stop needing one. If this story touched something in you, don't leave in silence. Tell me in the comments, what does forgiveness mean to you? Like, share, and subscribe for more real, heart-deep stories of betrayal, healing, and redemption. Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge is peace.